Chidinma Okafor counted the numbers twice before she let the man across the desk see her face at 9:47 on a Thursday night on the fourth floor of a lending office on Yulji Row that did not officially exist after visiting hours ended. She wore her good blouse, ironed that morning over a pot of jollof so the collar would not smell like smoke. In her left hand, closed so tight her knuckles had gone the color of old wood, she held a brass measuring tape worn pale at the 68-centimeter mark. She did not touch the folder of numbers with that hand. She used the other one. "Read it again," she said, "the renewal line." "Read me the interest rate you have written there." The collector, a young man with a lanyard and no authority of his own, read it. 14.5%. She had brought a calculator that still had her grandmother's fingerprint oil worn into the 9 key, and she used it now, in front of him, out loud. "My father signed for 8, she said. 8. In this office, 2 years ago. Someone changed it to 14.5 without telling him. That is not a renewal. That is theft with a signature stapled to it." It was not the collector's voice, sharpening toward threat, that stopped the man behind the glass partition at the back of the room. It was not the folder, or the hour, or the fact that a woman built wide and solid and unbothered by either had walked into a room designed to make people small and had made herself, instead, exact. It was the tape measure. She was not holding it like a tool. She was holding it like a rosary, thumb moving once across the worn brass, the way a person moves a thumb across a bead when the praying has gone quiet and only the motion is left. Seo Ji-hoon had come to that office to review a compliance file. He would not remember. Later, deciding to stay standing at the glass instead of walking through it. By the 9th day, he would know her name without being told it twice. He did not know that yet. 9 days earlier, Chidi had been standing at a different counter, in a different kind of light, the flat fluorescent hum of her own shop on a side street off Itaewon. A narrow storefront with a hand-painted sign that said the fitting room and, under it, smaller, seamstress, fitted for the body you have. She was letting out the waist of a wedding handbag 2 centimeters on each side, pins in her mouth, a bolt of persimmon silk draped over her shoulder like a second skin. The shop smelled like starch and the ginger tea she kept on a hot plate by the register. On the wall behind her hung the tape measure, unused for fittings now, too fragile for daily work, 150 centimeters of brass her grandmother, Ngozi, had carried from Enugu in 1996, paid for with 4,000 naira she had saved from selling akara on a corner for a year. Ngozi had taught her granddaughter to sew the way some grandmothers teach scripture, line by line, until the hands knew it without the mind being asked. "You're doing the thing with your jaw again," said Yetunde, calling from the salon 2 doors down, phone wedged between shoulder and ear while she flat ironed someone's edges. The thing where you clench it like you're chewing a problem instead of saying it out loud. "I'm not chewing anything. Chidi, I have known you since we were 19 and broke in the same dormitory. You get that jaw when it's your daddy's shop again. It was her father's shop again." Emeka Okafor had built Okafor Import and Textile from a single stall at Namdaemun into 3 storefronts over 20 years, bringing Ankara and Aso-oke and Kente from 3 different countries to a city that had, slowly, learned to want them. 2 years ago, a shipment had been seized at customs over a paperwork error that was not his, a broker's mistake, a stamp missing a single character, and the fines and storage fees had eaten what savings he had. He had borrowed 60 million won to save the third store. He had signed the papers himself at a folding table in a room he could not now remember the name of. He hasn't told me the real number, Chidi said. He tells me it's manageable. Manageable is not a number, Yeti. Manageable is a word men use so they don't have to say the number. You going to make him tell you? I'm going to look at the paper myself. She set the pens down. Kalechi's fees are due in 3 weeks. I am not raising my brother on manageable. Kalechi was 16, tall in the way boys get tall right before they fill out, quiet the way boys get quiet when they have learned to listen at doors. He came into the shop that evening with his backpack still on, dropped it by the register, and sat on the low stool where customers waited for him. Papa was on the phone again, he said, the angry voice kind, not the sales kind. What did he say? He said, I understand, 6 times. Then he said sorry. He doesn't say sorry to people on the phone. He says sorry to us. Chidi looked at her brother for a long moment, 16 and already doing the math nobody had asked him to do. Eat something, she said. I'll handle it. She did not know yet what handling it would cost. She only knew the number her father finally showed her 3 days later. Not 60 million, not anymore. 118,700,001, the string of zeros sitting on the page like a wall with no door in it. Interest that had crept, unannounced, from 8% to 14.5% somewhere inside a renewal clause her father had signed without reading twice, in a language that was not his first, at a table where nobody had explained anything slowly. Who is the lender? Chidi said. It was not a question. Her voice had already flattened into the register she used when a garment was ruined and had to be salvaged instead of mourned. CO Capital, her father said. The recovery arm. I did not know that name would mean anything to anyone. I know now. She looked at the wall calendar. 9 days until the next visit was scheduled. She did not know that somewhere across the river, on the 9th floor of a glass tower with his father's name still on the deed, a man was staring at the same file number, turning a pen over in his hand, and had not yet decided whether to read the whole thing or only the summary. The city he lived above did not know his name the way it knew the buildings. It knew a rumor instead, the ghost of Eulogy Row, the man whose recovery division could make a debt disappear a family's future without ever raising its voice. Seo Ji-hoon had inherited that reputation the way he had inherited the tower, whole, already built, with his fingerprints nowhere obviously on it. He kept an office on the top floor with one window that faced east and one chair on the visitor's side that nobody sat in twice. You have the Okafor file flagged, his assistant, Bayek Sung-min, said, setting a folder on the desk without being asked. 9 years working for this man had taught Bayek which folders got flagged and which got signed without a second look. This one had been flagged 3 times. Why does the name feel familiar? Ji-hoon said, not quite a question. I couldn't say, sir. Bake paused at the door. You've been reviewing the recovery contracts more than usual this quarter. Someone should. Your father never did. I am aware of what my father never did. He said it flatly, the way he said most things, but Bake, who had learned to read the 2 centimeters of difference between his employer's flat voice and his angry one, noted that this flatness had an edge folded into it, the kind a man carries when a sentence is standing in for a longer one he has decided not to say. Ji-hoon's mother had died when he was 12. She had spent the last years of her life mending other people's clothes in a room behind his father's first office, before the money came, before the tower, before anyone called this family anything but strivers. She had a tape measure of her own blue thread wound around one end where the metal clip had broken. He did not know where it was now. He had never let himself look for it. He signed the file without reading past the summary. Recovery proceeding on schedule. Household member to report for interview Thursday, 9:00 p.m. He would attend that interview only because he happened to be in the building reviewing something else entirely. He did not tell himself that was a lie. Not yet. Which brings us back to that night, the fourth floor, the fluorescent hum, the collector reading a number out loud while a woman corrected his math without raising her voice, and a man behind a glass partition who had come for a different file and could not now remember what it was. Ji-hoon walked through the glass at 10:02. 4 minutes before the interview was scheduled to end, and the family's file would default automatically into the next stage of recovery, a stage his division called, in its internal language, escalated contact. He had read that phrase 100 times without picturing what it meant. Tonight, he pictured it. A man like the young Okafor woman's father at a folding table at midnight. Someone's voice not raising, but not stopping either. "Stop reading the interest column," he said. The collector startled to his feet. Chidi did not. "And you are," she said, not standing either. "Someone who walks into rooms at 10 at night and tells other people what to stop reading." It was not a question. He almost answered it like one anyway. Director Seo, Baik supplied quietly from the doorway, the way he always did when his employer forgot that other people needed the noun before the pronoun made sense. "The renewal clause," Ji-hoon said, taking the folder himself. He read it once, slower than the collector had, 8% in the original hand, 14.5 in a different hand on the renewal page. No separate signature line beside the new figure, no initials confirming the change had been explained. His jaw did something Bayek had seen exactly twice in 9 years. "This renewal is non-compliant," he said. "Freeze the account. No further contact until I've reviewed the full loan history myself." "Sir, that's not standard procedure. The board reviews. I am aware of what the board reviews." He closed the folder. "I am telling you what I am reviewing." Chidi stood then, finally, unhurried, and picked up her father's copy of the contract from the desk, folding it once along its existing crease. She did not thank him. He would think about that for 3 days before he understood it was not rudeness. It was a woman who had learned the hard way. That gratitude offered too early to powerful men was a debt of its own, and she was done taking on debts she had not chosen. "You'll forgive me," she said, "if I don't call this kindness yet. I've seen kindness with paperwork before. It usually has a second page." "There is no second page," he said. "There's always a second page, Director Seo. I just haven't read it." She left with her father's folder under one arm and the tape measure still in her other hand, and Ji-hoon stood at the glass a long time after the elevator doors had closed on her, turning a phrase over that he had not said out loud. He did not know yet why her voice, precise and unhurried even at its angriest, had sounded for one full sentence exactly like his mother's. He pulled the full loan history that night. 60 million won, disbursed 2 years and 11 days earlier, under a program his father had launched in the company's earliest lean years and never closed. A fast approval product for small importers, advertised in the very neighborhoods where his mother had once mended clothes for people who never learned her name. Ji-hoon had inherited the company 18 months ago. He had renewed the entire product line in his first quarter as CEO in a batch approval on the recommendation of a division head who no longer worked there, without reading the individual files. He scrolled to the renewal authorization on the Okafor account. The signature at the bottom was his own. He did not sleep that night. He told himself it was the hour. It was not the hour. Emeka Okafor came to the shop the next morning looking like a man who had aged a year in a week, and told his daughter, in the low voice he used only for things he was ashamed of, that CO Capital's office had called, not to threaten, this time, but to offer terms. The recovery division was willing to freeze the debt for 90 days pending an internal review, on the condition that a household member work a fixed arrangement at the director's private residence, cataloging and restoring a collection of textiles that had belonged to the family for 2 generations. Work the company's own staff had failed at twice. It was framed on the letterhead as a goodwill placement. Emeka heard something else in it. He was a proud man who had spent 2 years watching his pride get itemized on a payment schedule. And when he told Chidi what the letter said, what he heard himself offering, his daughter, into a rich man's house as the price of his own mistake, his voice broke on the word placement like it had teeth in it. "I will not do this to you," he said. "I will find another way. I will sell the 3rd store outright. You'll sell nothing," Chidi said. "Chidi, I am not being handed to anyone, Papa. Hear me say that clearly, because I need you to hear it and not just the shame talking. I am choosing to go and negotiate my own terms because I am the only person in this family with a needle steady enough to fix 200 years of somebody else's fabric, and because 90 days of my mornings is a fair price for getting your name off a debt that was never honestly yours to begin with." She folded the letter along a new crease, the way she folded everything, precise. "But it will be on my terms, not theirs." She called the number on the letterhead herself. She did not ask for Director CO. She asked for whoever handled contracts. And when a scheduling assistant tried to set the arrangement for 6 days a week, live in, she said no. 3 mornings. "I keep my shop, I keep my own bed, and I am paid a wage for the restoration work separate from anything applied to my father's account, in writing, with an end date printed on the page." The assistant, flustered, said she would need to confirm with the director. Chidi said she would wait. Ji-hoon, hearing the terms relayed to him 20 minutes later, felt something in his chest do a thing it had not done in longer than he could name. "She negotiated," he said. "She negotiated hard, sir. Wouldn't move on the wage. Wouldn't move on the end date." "Approve it," Ji-hoon said, exactly as she wrote it. Bayek, watching his employer's face longer than protocol required, said nothing and filed that look away the way he filed everything, for later when it would matter. Chidi arrived at the estate on a Tuesday morning in a coat that did not match the house it was walking into, and did not apologize for that either. The residence sat above the city on a hill in Songbuk-dong, glass and pale stone, a house built to be admired from a distance and lived in by almost no one. A housekeeper named Mrs. An met her at the door, took one look at her steady hands and her already rolled sleeves, and decided within 30 seconds that she liked her. "The collection is in the East Room," Mrs. An said. "Nobody has touched it properly in years. The director's mother's things, mostly he doesn't come in there." The East Room held 6 trunks of textiles, some Korean hanbok silks gone brittle at the folds, and, inexplicably to Chidi, until she understood the family's early history and trade, bolts of West African cloth, indigo and kente, bought decades ago and never used, still smelling faintly of cedar and dust. She ran her hand over a length of aso oke and felt, for one disorienting second, like she was standing in her grandmother's stall in Enugu. "He collects fabric he never wears," she said to no one. "His mother did," Mrs. An said, appearing in the doorway with tea. "She was a seamstress before she married into money. She kept saying she'd use the African cloth for something grand someday. She died before someday came." Mrs. An set the tray down. "He doesn't talk about her. But he built this room and never let anyone throw a single thread away. That tells you something, if you know how to read a man who won't use his mouth to say it." Chidi began cataloging that first morning, and by the third, she had a system. Condition, origin, era, written in a hand so neat it looked printed. Ji-hoon came home on the 4th evening earlier than usual, told himself it was coincidence, and found her in the East Room with a bolt of indigo draped over one arm, humming something low and unplaceable, a fragment of a song his mother used to hum over the same kind of fabric, in the same kind of light. "You're humming," he said from the doorway, before he had decided to speak at all. "It helps the counting. I do it without noticing. What is it?" "The song." "A hymn. My grandmother's. She used to say the Lord doesn't mind if you sing him half a tune, as long as you mean the half you sing." She looked up. "You're staring at the fabric like it owes you money, Director CO. It was my mother's." Something in his voice, flat, but with the same fold in it Bayek had learned to hear, made Chidi set the bolt down gently instead of arguing the joke further. "She had good taste," she said, simpler than she meant anything all week. "A so-okay this fine hand-woven, not the machine kind, this would have cost her months of saving, wherever she found it. She never told me where." "Then I'll tell you what it's worth instead, since I can't tell you the story." Chidi held the fabric to the light. "It's worth more now than the day she bought it. Cloth like this, kept right, only gets more honest with age, doesn't fade so much as settle into what it always was." He did not say anything for a long moment. "Sit," he said finally, and then, hearing himself, added, softer, "Please, if you'd like tea." "You've been standing 4 hours. That's the first please I've heard out of this house," Chidi said, but she sat. The nickname started that week, small and half joking, Mrs. An calling her Sion saying Nim, teacher, for the careful way she instructed the household staff on handling the fabric, and Chidi, without meaning to claim anything by it, calling him by his title less and his surname more. Director CO shortened, without ceremony, into Seo Ji-hoon, and then twice, by accident, into just Ji-hoon. And both times she caught herself, and both times he did not correct her. The kitchen scene came on a Thursday, when Mrs. An was out, and the house's usual dinner order had fallen through, and Chidi, unable to watch a grown man stand in front of an empty refrigerator like it was a foreign document, took over without asking permission. She made egusi soup from ingredients Mrs. An kept, unexplained, in a corner cabinet, a habit, it turned out, from years of Ji-hoon's mother doing the same, cooking dishes from cloth country when the money first came and nobody had told her yet that she was allowed to want things from home. The kitchen filled with a smell the house had not held in 20 years. Ji-hoon stood in the doorway, tie loosened, and did not say anything for so long that Chidi turned around to check if he was still there. "You don't have to eat it," she said. "I made enough for the staff, too." "My mother used to make something with that smell," he said. "I didn't know the name of it. I never asked her the name of it." "Egusi," Chidi said, gently, ground melon seed, greens, palm oil. Poor man's protein back home, rich man's comfort everywhere else. Funny how that works. He ate 2 bowls. He did not say another word the whole meal, and she did not feel the silence either, because some silences she had learned from her grandmother were not empty. They were just full of something that had not found its sentence yet. It was 3 days later, cataloging a trunk she had saved for last because it was locked and she had needed Mrs. An to find the key, that Chidi found a ledger that was not fabric at all, an old company book, water-stained, tucked beneath a folded length of kente as though someone had hidden it there deliberately, decades ago, and forgotten. She almost set it aside. Then she saw the header on the open page, Emergency Import Lending Program, Disbursement Log, and beneath it, 3 columns down, a name she knew better than her own hands knew a hymn. Okafor, E, 60 million to KRW, disbursed, beside it, in a second hand, a note, renewal approved per new terms, see signature page. She did not need to see the signature page. She already knew whose desk that ledger had come from and whose name had to be on it, because this was not the Recovery Division's copy. This was the founder's private ledger, kept in a locked trunk in an east room nobody entered, the very room she had been hired by his own signature to organize. She sat very still for a long time, the ledger open on her lap, indigo cloth pulled around her knees, and understood, with the flat, clean grief of arithmetic, that the man who had unfrozen her father's account with one sentence in a glass-walled office was the same man whose signature had doubled it 2 years before. He had known, or he had not known, and that was somehow worse, because a man who could authorize the ruin of a family without reading their name closely enough to recognize it later was a man who had built his kindness on top of a carelessness he had never had to answer for. She did not confront him that night. She told herself it was because she needed to be sure. It was also, if she was honest, because some small, unguarded part of her did not want the 4 weeks of humming over indigo cloth and 2 bowls of egusi soup to end yet, and she hated herself a little for that, sitting on the floor of a room built by money that had cost her father 2 years of his life. Ji-hoon found the same signature 4 days later from the other direction, pulling every file in the emergency lending program himself, line by line, after a night he could not fully explain even to himself, in which he had dreamed of his mother's hands and woken with the specific, awful certainty that he needed to check something. He found his own initials on 140 renewal authorizations, batch approved in his first quarter. Interest rates quietly restructured by a division head trading on his inexperience and his unwillingness in those early months to read past a summary page. Okafor was the 63rd name on the list. He put his head in his hands in an office with a view of the whole indifferent city and did not move for 11 minutes, which Bayek. Watching the clock from the outer office, because something in his employer's stillness had unsettled him, would later describe to no one as the longest 11 minutes of his career. He did not tell Chidi. He told himself he needed the full number first. Every family, every renewal, every one of harm counted before he could stand in front of her and say anything honest. He told himself this was responsibility. He did not let himself examine how conveniently responsibility could double as cowardice, how a man could call silence diligence and mean, underneath it only that he was afraid. The concealment sat between them for 11 days like a third person in every room, and Chidi, who had decided the same thing from her own side of it, that she needed proof beyond one water-stained ledger before she said a word that could not be unsaid, did not know that the silence she was keeping and the silence he was keeping were, for once, made of the exact same fear. The Yu family arrived for dinner on the 12th day of her placement, and Chidi understood within the first 10 minutes what kind of evening it was going to be. Yu Seo-yoon came in a pale blue hanbok worth more than the shop rent for a year, flanked by a father who talked business at Ji-hoon in the tone of a man closing rather than negotiating, and by Seo Ji-hoon's uncle, Seo Kwan-woo, chairman of the board, who had the particular gift of saying cruel things in language so polished they sounded, to anyone not listening closely, like compliments. "You must be the seamstress," Seo-yun said, when Chidi came in briefly to check the table settings against Mrs. An's instructions. How wonderfully hands-on of Ji-hoon. Very charitable. "I'm being paid," Chidi said pleasantly. "Charity doesn't come with an invoice." Seo-yun's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "It's refreshing, honestly, having someone so substantial in the house. Adds a certain warmth, don't you think, Uncle Kwan-woo?" "Very exotic." "The word you want," Chidi said, still pleasant, still folding a napkin with perfect corners, "is African, if you're describing where I'm from. Or fat, if you're describing what you can see, and either one you can say to my face without dressing it up as a compliment. I've been called both my whole life by people with better manners than you're managing tonight." The table went very quiet. Ji-hoon, arriving in the doorway in time to hear the last of it, felt something in his chest that he would later identify as pride and did not, in the moment, have a name for. "An unusual staff member," Kwan-woo said, recovering first, his voice sliding into the register Chidi would come to recognize as his signature weapon, mild, reasonable, lethal, though I'll admit I find the whole Recovery Division review rather a distraction this quarter, Ji-hoon. "The board has concerns, optics concerns. A director photographed too often with his restoration consultant while a merger vote approaches is not a manageable exposure. The merger vote is in 9 days, Ji-hoon said. I'm aware of the calendar, Uncle. Then be aware of the arithmetic too, Kwan-woo said, and smiled at Chidi with all his teeth. It would be a shame for sentiment to cost this family a merger 9 years in the making. Sentiment is expensive, especially sentiment for the help. Chidi set the last napkin down without a tremor in her hand, though something in her chest had gone very tight. I'll leave you to your arithmetic, she said, and left the room with her back straight, and it was only in the hallway, out of sight, that she let her breath go unsteady for exactly 4 seconds before she made herself stop. Ji-hoon found her 20 minutes later on the terrace, city lights spread out below the hill like something spilled and glittering. "I should have said something at the table," he said. "You'd have made it worse." A man defending a woman in that room turns her into a headline instead of a person. She did not look at him. "I've been called worse by people with less power to make it stick." "I'll survive your uncle's arithmetic." "You shouldn't have to survive it. You should just not have to hear it." "That's a nice sentence, Ji-hoon." She used the shortened name deliberately, testing it in the dark. But nice sentences don't change who's still sitting at that table in 9 days. He stepped closer, close enough that the wind off the terrace pulled the smell of her, starch and ginger, faint under the cold night air, toward him, and for one long moment neither of them said anything. And his hand rose, slow, uncertain, toward her face. His phone rang. He almost didn't answer it. He would spend the rest of the night wishing he hadn't. "Bake," he said, voice rough. He listened for 11 seconds. His face changed in a way Chidi had not seen it change before, not even over the ledger she did not yet know he'd found. "Send it to my private line," he said. "Now what is it?" Chidi asked, and he looked at her the way a man looks at someone he is about to lose and does not yet have the words to stop. "A story," he said, "running tomorrow. About us." The story ran at 6 a.m. under a headline that used the word gold digger twice and the phrase debtor's daughter once, alongside a photograph, grainy, taken from below on the terrace, timed to make his half-raised hand look like something it had not quite been, and beneath it, embedded by whoever had leaked it, a scan of a single page from the emergency lending program's disbursement log. Okafor, E. 60 million cardable. Renewal approved per new terms. Signature, Seo Ji-hoon. Chidi read it standing in the East Room at 6:14 a.m. on her phone, still in the coat that had never matched the house, and understood 2 things in the same 4 seconds. The first was that all of Seoul now believed she had traded her body and her family's shame for a rich man's attention. The second, and the one that actually took her legs out from under her, was that the signature at the bottom of that renewal page was not new to her at all. She had already seen it 11 days ago in a locked trunk on paper with water damage along one edge, and she had said nothing because she had wanted, God forgive her, a little more time in a kitchen that smelled like home. He had known, not just now, before the terrace, before the agouti soup, before he had ever asked her to sit. Ji-hoon found her 40 minutes later, already coated, a single bag packed, the framed measuring tape she had brought to hang on her workroom wall left, deliberately, on the table where he would find it and understand exactly what it meant to leave something behind on purpose. "Chidi, I found the ledger 11 days ago," she said, and her voice did not shake, which was somehow worse than if it had. "The one with my father's name in it. In the trunk you gave me the key to. I told myself I needed to be sure before I said anything to you. I understand now that I was giving you the same chance I wanted for myself, to come to it honestly, before someone else made you. You didn't take it. I was building the full account. Every family. I wanted to bring you the whole. You wanted to bring me a finished apology instead of an honest one," she said. "There's a difference, Ji-hoon. A finished apology protects the man giving it. An honest one costs him something the moment he opens his mouth. You had 11 days to cost yourself something in front of me, and you spent them deciding how the numbers would look when you were ready. Don't leave like this. I'm not leaving like anything, she said. I'm leaving quietly. That's the only part of this that's still mine to choose. She did not slam the door. That was the part he could not stop hearing for days afterward, in the particular silence of a house built for people who were never really there, that the woman who had filled it with singing and soup and the smell of home for 4 weeks had walked out of it without a single raised voice. And the quiet she left behind was louder than anything his uncle had ever said at a table. The board met in 6 days instead of 9, moved up by Kwan Woo the moment the story broke, and Ji-hoon walked into that meeting having not slept properly in 5 nights and having read, in full, every one of the 141 files his own hand had touched. He did not defend himself first. He put the full number on the table before anyone could ask for it. 4,800,000,000 he said. That is the aggregate harm across every family in the emergency lending program, whose renewal terms I approved without adequate review. 219 families. I am forgiving the outstanding balance on all of them, effective today, and I am dissolving the Recovery Division's current practice model entirely. This is not a proposal. It is already signed. You will cost this family the U merger, Kwan Woo said. Very quiet, very reasonable. You will cost us a board seat. You will cost. I know what it costs, Ji-hoon said. I have spent 5 nights counting it. It costs less than what silence has already cost 219 families, and it costs less than what my own silence cost one woman who deserved better than a finished apology. He looked around the table. Anyone who wants to make this a vote may make it a vote. I will resign the chairmanship before I reverse it. Nobody called the vote. The merger collapsed within the week. Kwon Woo resigned from the board a month later under circumstances the company's press office described with unintentional irony as an optics matter of his own. Yoo Seo-yeon, to her credit, called Chidi's shop directly 2 weeks after, not to apologize exactly, but to say, in a voice stripped of its dinner party polish, that she had not liked the woman she'd been at that table either, and that watching a man lose a merger on principle had made her wonder what principle she'd ever been offered the chance to lose one for. It was not friendship. It was something smaller and more honest, and Chidi took it for what it was. Emeka Okafor received the notice of forgiveness on a Tuesday and sat with it at his kitchen table for an hour before he called his daughter, and when he did, his voice broke on a different word than shame this time. He didn't do it for me, Emeka said. I want you to know I understand that. No, Chidi said. He did it because it was owed. Whether it costs me anything is a different question, and it's mine to answer, not his. Ji-hoon tried, once through Baek, to arrange a private repayment directly to Chidi for the wages still owed from her placement, a generous figure rounded up, meant kindly. Chidi sent it back within the hour with a note in her own precise hand, I am not a charity case, and neither was my father. And neither is the ledger you just closed. Pay me what the contract says, on the day the contract says, the way you would pay anyone else who did the work. If you want to give me something else, it will have to be something that costs you more than money. Baek read that note twice before he brought it to his employer's desk and said, in the closest thing to a personal remark he had allowed himself in 9 years of service. I think she just told you how to win her back, sir. I don't believe she meant to. It took Chidi 3 weeks to come to CO Capital's offices herself, and when she did, it was not through the private elevator and not at his invitation. She came through the front doors at 2:00 p.m. On a Wednesday, in her good blouse, with a folder under her arm, thicker than the one she had carried into the recovery office the night this whole story started, and she asked the front desk for a meeting with the director regarding the 219 affected families. In her capacity, she said, as their appointed representative. She had spent those 3 weeks finding them, going door to door with Yatunde and Kalechi, and a list built from the leaked ledger page, talking to shopkeepers and importers, and one widow who had lost her flower stall entirely, taking down not just what was owed, but what had actually been lost. Contracts, months, marriages strained thin, one man's health. She walked into Ji-hoon's office and set the folder on his desk instead of herself in the chair. The forgiveness was a good first step, she said. It was not restitution. 219 families lost more than principal and interest. I've itemized it. I want a fund, structured, independent of your board, administered by people the families choose, not people you appoint to look good in a press release. Tell me what you're proposing, Ji-hoon said, and did not reach for the folder yet. He was looking at her instead, the way a man looks at a door he has been waiting outside of for 3 weeks, uncertain whether it will open. A microloan program. Fair terms, published publicly, reviewed by an outside board every year so no one signs a renewal in the dark again. Named for 2 women who worked with their hands their whole lives and never got a building or a bank named after them, because women like that don't. Usually, she met his eyes. I want it named for your mother and mine. Han Suk and Ngozi Okafor. Not for either of us. He was quiet for a long moment. You did the work I should have done in 5 nights, he said, in 3 weeks, without a company or a signature to hide behind. I had motivation you didn't, she said, and something in her voice, for the first time in 3 weeks, was not entirely armored. I wasn't trying to fix a mistake. I was trying to prove I hadn't been one. You were never that, he said. Chidi, I'm not finished. She folded her hands, the old habit, precise, this isn't punishment, coming here today. I want to be clear about that, because a version of this story has been circling since the night my father first showed me that letter. The version where I was handed to you, where I had no say, where somebody else's guilt or somebody else's debt decided what happened to me next. I decided to walk into that recovery office and correct a stranger's math. I decided to negotiate my own terms into that house. I decided to leave when you gave me a reason to. And I've decided to come back today on my terms again because a fund with my grandmother's name on it isn't the only reason I'm standing in this office. She exhaled. You're the other reason. I'd rather say that once, honestly, than spend 3 more weeks pretending the folder was the whole visit. I should have told you the day I found my own signature, he said. I told myself I was protecting you from an unfinished answer. I understand now I was protecting myself from an unfinished man. You were the first person who ever asked what I thought instead of telling me what my name was worth. I didn't know how to risk losing that honestly, so I tried to keep it by being careful instead of true. and I lost it anyway, the way careful men always do. One dinner, Chidi said, after a silence that held more in it than either of the two apologies just spoken. That's my condition, if you're asking. One dinner, cooked in your kitchen, by me, and I keep my shop, the one I built, not the one your family's money touched, and this fund is run by the families, not by you. If you can agree to a woman setting terms for the rest of your life the way I set them for 4 weeks in your house, then yes, I'll stay for the dinner. Possibly longer. Agreed, he said to all of it, and it was not a question, and this time she did not correct him for saying it like one. He crossed the office slowly, the way a man crosses distance he has spent his whole life being taught to keep, and stopped close enough that she had to tilt her chin up, and he touched her face the way he had almost touched it on the terrace 3 weeks and one long silence ago, and this time nothing rang to stop him. The kiss was brief and certain, more a settling than a spark. The way a hymn finally lies flat after the last pen comes out. Chidi, he said against her forehead, the name alone now, no title left in it at all. Jihoon, she said back, and it sounded for the first time like something she had chosen to call him rather than something she had simply allowed. 6 months later, the Han Mi Suk, an Ngozi Okafor Thread Fund, had disbursed its first 41 loans. Every rate published on a public page, every renewal reviewed by a rotating board of the families it served, Emeka Okafor among them, sitting his first term as an elected reviewer with a steadiness in his shoulders that had not been there in 2 years. His third store had reopened, its window filled, at Chidi's insistence, with a single bolt of hand-dyed indigo that was not for sale. A placard beneath it reading simply, "Not everything here is for sale. Some of it is just for looking and for remembering what was almost lost." Seo Kwan-woo had resigned every remaining position he held by spring and moved, according to Bayek's carefully neutral report, to a city where fewer people asked him about optics. Yoo Seo-yun had taken a seat on the fund's outside advisory board, unpaid, unglamorous, and, she told Chidi over coffee one afternoon, the first thing she had ever done that nobody's family had arranged for her. The fitting room had expanded into the storefront next door, a wall knocked through, a new sign painted by Kalechi himself, fitted for the body you have, and the one you're becoming. Chidi's plus-size bridal line, built from years of clients nobody else's shop had measured correctly, launched that spring to a waiting list 4 months deep, funded by nothing but her own earnings and, notably, not one of CO money. A distinction she made a point of stating in every interview. Gently, precisely, the way she stated everything. The measuring tape hung framed above the register now, 150 centimeters of brass worn pale at 68, retired from daily work at last, a small card beside it reading, "This measured me for 20 years. Now it just reminds me what I was always the right size for." Beside it hung a second tape, new, unworn, a gift Chidi had given to her first apprentice, a heavy-set 17-year-old named Blessing, who had come in for a hymn and stayed for a job, with the same instruction Ngozi had once given her, measure the body in front of you, not the one the world wishes you'd brought instead. On the last Saturday of that 6th month, Jihoon closed the Recovery Division's old headquarters permanently, converting the space into the fund's public office, and afterward climbed the hill to the house in Sangbuk-dong, where the East Room, cleared of its trunks now, had become something else entirely. a shared workroom, half his mother's old fabric and half a life Chidi had built from nothing. Indigo and kente and silk sharing shelf space at last, the way his mother had always meant them to. He found Chidi on the terrace at dusk, the city lighting up below the hill in its slow, indifferent way, and did not reach for his phone this time when it buzzed once, twice, and went mercifully quiet. "Marry me," he said. Not a question. She had taught him somewhere in the last 6 months that some sentences were stronger left that way, as long as the person hearing them still got to answer freely. "Ask me properly," she said, smiling, "and I'll consider it." "Chidinma Okafor," he said, taking her hand, brass-worn palm and all. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, "not because you're rich, and not because you're sorry, though I'll take the sorry as a down payment on the rest of your life. Because you're the first man who ever let me set every term of my own story and stayed anyway." She looked out at the skyline, warm windows scattered across a cold grid of glass and steel, the whole indifferent city bearing witness the way it always had. "That's the whole ledger, Ji-hoon, paid in full. A debt, honestly counted, always costs someone something. The only question worth asking is who's brave enough to be the one who pays it. If Chidi's tape measure and Ji-hoon's ledger meant something to you tonight, I'd love to know where you landed. Would you have walked into that recovery office and corrected the collector's math the way she did? Or would fear have kept you quiet at that folding table? Tell me below. I read every one of them. And if stories like this one, about dignity that refuses to be discounted and love that finally learns to see clearly, are the kind you want more of, subscribe to Deiji's channel _name so you don't miss the next one. Somewhere tonight, someone is still counting coins twice before they let anyone see their face. May they find, eventually, someone worth showing it to. See you in the next story.